So welcome back to the channel. Just a reminder, I'm Joey and this is Moon's Creative Mayhem. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe and leave any comments. I love the How to Train Your Dragon films and I've been really excited about the live version coming out. When the original came out a few years ago, I painted How to Train Your Dragon on this big canvas that I got cheap from the works at the time. Then, a few years later, I did another painting when I finished reading the books. And today I'm going to do a third How to Train Your Dragon painting, but it's going to be very different from these. I think it's probably going to feature moonlight too. I was excited for a very long time about How to Train Your Dragon, the live action movie coming out. I was really hoping it was going to be more like the books. I do love the How to Train Your Dragon animated movies, but I also love the books a lot, and I thought it'd be a good opportunity for them to be able to make it closer to what the books were. It looks like it's not going to be that, it's going to be exactly like the animated version of the film. So what I've decided to do is to create my own little How to Train Your Dragon image based on the books. I'm painting in oils onto a stretched canvas.
I started the painting by putting on a layer of white acrylic gesso, and then once it was dried, I put another layer and then used Bob Ross liquid clear. Next, I blocked in the colours, so I used a yellow ochre for the trees and I mixed it in with a white and a very small amount of phthalo blue. I went out to phthalo blue at the sides just to make more of a green colour and just blocked everything in. In the middle section where the light's coming through the trees, I made that part as light as possible and then I aimed to go darker around the edges. And along where the front of the trees and the grass are, I made those a much darker green just to try and bring them into focus more to give the painting distance. I blocked in two large focal trees for each side of the painting. For those I used burnt sienna and I mixed it with a very small amount of phthalo blue just to cool it down a bit. If you mix opposite colours together, then it makes a more natural tone and greys it down a little bit into a more of a natural brown. Burnt sienna is quite a bright red sort of a brown, so it can look a bit unnatural if you use it without mixing. When I was painting in the log that Moonlight is sitting on, I tried to make sure that the middle section was where the light was hitting, so the light source is directly behind to the middle of the picture.
So I've been painting this for about an hour and a half to 2 hours now. I've got the basic background in and the grass and background of trees. I'm not very happy with it at all. I'm no good at painting the landscape parts. I like painting the faces, I like painting the animals, and I'm finding it really quite hard. To me, a lot of the colours have blended quite a lot. They look kind of dirty, so I'm looking forward to a few days from now when the paint's dry enough that I can fix the light coming through the trees and put some kind of detail and get some direction for the background.
So the Viking hat was from the How to Train Your Dragon picture, where Hiccup has Toothless on his arm. It's quite a plain looking Viking hat, and it was really tempting that I wanted to put something a bit more exciting on it, but I do want to keep the general feel of the picture the same as the one from the book. It was here that I started to become more happy with the landscape part of the picture, where I've done the long strokes for the grass, and I've layered the paint on really thick in the front of the picture, whereas in the back edge it's a lot more thin. It's watered down, the paint is, where I've kept it almost solid oil paint for texture in the front edge. On the reference picture that I was supposed to be working on, Hiccup's top underneath his vest was a dark colour, and I painted it a lighter colour here just because I wanted it to contrast with the vest top. I'm not sure at this point whether that's the right decision or not, but see how it goes. Painting in where the bits of fluff on Hiccup's jacket hits the light is really quite a nice part of painting. It's just easy sketching in the highlights with the oil paint. You don't need to be neat. In fact, the more different directions you have on the brush, the more it looks like natural fluff on his jacket. And this is where the cartoony bit really comes in, of Moonlight's little dragon dress-up jacket. I really enjoyed painting this part. I look at other people's pictures, and often I'm really attracted to super realistic looking paintings. But when I actually paint things, I enjoy painting things in a cartoony, happy way. I like bright colours that bounce off the page. They just make me happy to look at them. So I tried to keep the outlines on Moonlight's body in black to begin with, so that I didn't lose the pencil lines and the shapes underneath. If you're painting in black, then obviously you're going to lose the pencil marks otherwise. And it just gave a good reference to put in the highlights onto her legs and make her look a bit more 3D. I decided to paint the book in a red colour because I wanted it to contrast against Moonlight. It's quite bright and I felt like it needed something to balance on the other side. I've moved on from painting in the landscape parts of the painting, and I've started painting in the dog, which I'm very pleased with at the moment, and the book. I'm looking forward to painting the boy's face. And I've fixed part of the tree trunk so it's got a lot more texture. I've put on the oil paint a lot thicker everywhere than I'd originally intended to, but I've decided just to go with it. If it's going to be on thick, then I might as well just make it really thick, and that will be the texture and the style of it. And I'm much happier than I was this morning when I'd done the landscape. So hopefully the more I do on the faces as well, I'll be happier with it. If you read a book on how to paint using oil paint, the first thing that it would say would be to paint dark first and then light on top. When I started painting in the boy's face, I painted in the shadow sections first and then went around and blended them in with a mix that was like a flesh tone. For flesh colour, I always start with yellow ochre, a small bit of red and white. I did actually add in a small amount of burnt sienna this time as well, just kind of to have warm tones around his face. There's a lot of yellow in the picture and I wanted a little bit of red just so his face didn't blend in too much to the background. I painted shadows under his hair using a burnt sienna, and I mixed in a tiny bit of phthalo blue to turn it down into a less of a red colour and add shadow. It's good to add a blue colour in when you are drawing shadows. I always enjoy painting in eyes on characters. I feel like once you have the eyes in, then it really brings them to life, and then I find it a lot more fun painting the rest of the picture. I used a dark brown around the outside, and then it goes lighter brown and then black with just a dollop of white. Although he doesn't look like Hiccup at all, some of the features of the boy look more like my son's features, the glasses and the blonde hair. I wanted to keep Hiccup's expression, so I had those same upturned eyebrows. For his hair, the same as his face, I painted in the shadow side of his hair, just under his hat first. Then I went over it in a blonde colour, which was a mix of yellow ochre and white and a small bit of yellow. I picked a dark blue colour for his glasses because I wanted to add in more colours than would just the warm colours of the yellowy sky in the background. Everything was quite warm, so I thought having a dark blue in there might be nice. And a very cartoony fish for Moonlight to eat. Obviously, dogs don't particularly eat fish. Like, that's more of a cat thing, but Toothless does eat them, so that's what she has. So this is just going in and highlighting white sections onto his face just for highlights. Same with his hair. And painting in the shadows on his jumper and just using quite long strokes to show the wrinkles in the folds of his clothing. Now the paint had dried a little bit here, so that was when I added in the scales onto Moonlight's costume. So that was yellow and then a very bright green. I made the gemstones on Hiccup's Viking hat green so that they would match Moonlight's costume.
As I always do, I've managed to smudge my hand straight through the paint while I was painting it, because oil paint stays wet, obviously. So what you do is I've taken a dry brush and I've used the dry brush just to pick that paint back off. I was lazy and didn't pick up another dry brush or cleaned it. I turned it, so then I smooshed more blue into his face. So I've used another brush to clean that up, and yeah, can keep going now.
I touched up some of the shading around his eyes and his nose just to make the browns a little bit darker so that he would come out of the page a little bit more and look more 3D.
Well, I'm back. I've just had a little bit of a break, and coming back to it, I think I'm going to have to brighten up some of the colours on the boy because moonlight is really dominating the picture with the bright green. So I think I'm going to make the book a little bit more bright red. I've already added bright green gems on the top of the Viking helmet, and I'm just going to try and brighten it up there. Then I'm going to put some details in the background, and yeah, we'll see how this goes from here.
I decided to put in brighter colours on the book and make that more of a focal point to bring in the How to Train Your Dragon connection. So I copied the general look of the front of the How to Train Your Dragon book. And I really darkened up the shading around Moonlight's face, especially around her eyes, just to make them kind of sink in a lot, where pugs do have that very, very flat face. Sometimes you take a photo of Moonlight, and because her face is so dark and so flat, it just looks like a black expanse of fur, and it's hard to get the shading when you're painting a pug. So I tried to put in as many light sections as I could, just so you didn't lose her features. I used a phthalo blue here that I'd watered down quite a lot, just to add a glaze kind of over the top of the dark jacket that I'd already done on him to make it a brighter blue and change the colour. I was really happy with it in the blue, actually. I think the bold colours make the picture look a lot happier. They change the tone. They're very different to what I'd done on Photoshop when I was choosing the colours, but I'm happy with how they came out. This is really quite a personal painting, so to most people they'd see this picture and they wouldn't probably tie it up with How to Train Your Dragon at all. But for me, I read my son the books when he was little and we really liked it, and obviously it's got his dog in the picture as well, and Moonlight's a cheeky dog and Toothless is a cheeky dragon. It's at this point I really tried to add more depth and interest into the background, so I added in more yellowy colours, sections of grass, little bushes, things like that. And I added shading onto the right side of the trees and a sort of a yellow glow onto the left side, just to bring atmosphere into the background. I tried to darken up the trees on the outside edge of the painting whilst keeping the ones in the middle lighter, because that's where the light was coming from, and I thought this would help with distance. Where the middle section where the light coming from was quite white and yellow, I again was losing the boy's shirt with it being white, so I experimented on putting yellow in, then found that that was getting lost. So here is where I've added in some red, so it's become almost a slightly orange colour, but I was a lot happier with it looking like that. Just adding in more shading and trying to get some more detail into the eyes. Learning how to paint and draw is often about experience and just picking up little tips along the way. And I put more shading into the grass at the front, which I started to be really happy with at this point.
I'm much happier with how the trees look now that the oil paint on the underlayer in the background has dried off. So I've used a fan brush this time. Before, I think I was making a bit of a moonlight. I was making a bit of a mess of the leaves and everything because the paint was really wet and I was using a pointed brush. So I've used the fan brush and I've done it when it's been drier and it's looking a lot better.
I tried to add in small branches and little bits of detail just so that the painting didn't look too bare in the back sections. So I used a lot of paint thinner. Once I added in the darker parts, I went back with the white again, just to add a real glow.
Painting in the detail on the How to Train Your Dragon book is quite difficult because the oil paint's still wet. So I don't feel like it needs to be perfect, the lettering, so I'm just going with the general look of the front cover. I could wait for the paint to dry and then put the letters in and it would be really accurate. But I quite like it to look more sketchy anyway, so I'm going to do that.
And again, I went back to Moonlight and added more highlights and more shadows onto her. I just wanted her to look as 3D as I possibly could make her. I added in some white on the front of the boy's glasses so that they looked like they had kind of a glare and that there was glass in them. And I changed his hair to cover up his ear a little bit. Video at top of the screen is actually some retouching that I did on the painting once I had finished, just putting in a few extra details. And I thought I'd make it look like there was some sort of dandelion type weeds in the front and just some long grass. I put in some extra shading around the log again, which is very textured, the log part of the painting. The paint is very, very thick there, probably the thickest on any of the picture. And I just went in, putting tiny details in different spots.
Okay, so there it is, the finished How to Train Your Dragon, or How to Train Your Moonlight picture done in oils. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave any comments, and I promise I'll reply to them.